In the middle of the Adriatic Sea sits one of the most extraordinary cities ever built. Venice is a city that seems almost impossible. A vast network of canals, marble palaces rising from the water, and streets that are not streets at all, but waterways carved between islands. For centuries, it was one of the richest and most powerful cities in Europe, dominating trade between East and West, and commanding a maritime empire that stretched across the Mediterranean. But Venice was never supposed to exist. It was not founded by kings, nor planned by emperors, nor built as a grand vision of empire. Instead, its origins lie in fear, desperation, and survival. And strangely enough, one of the key figures responsible for its creation was not a Venetian ruler, but one of the most feared conquerors in history, Attila the Hun. To understand how this happened, we have to return to the final centuries of the Roman Empire, when Europe was entering one of the most chaotic and dangerous periods in its history. By the early 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was already weakening. Political instability, economic strain, and repeated invasions were slowly eroding Rome's control over its vast territories. Yet even in this fragile state, the empire still possessed wealthy and thriving cities across northern Italy. Places like Aquileia, Padua, and Altinum were prosperous trading centers connected by Roman roads and protected by the legacy of Roman power. Then, in the year 452 AD, a new and terrifying force arrived. From the east came the Huns, a confederation of steppe warriors whose speed and brutality had already shaken much of Europe. Unlike the heavily armored Roman legions, the Huns fought primarily as mounted archers, capable of moving with astonishing speed across vast distances. They struck suddenly, overwhelmed their enemies, and vanished before organized resistance could form. Leading them was Attila. Even among conquerors, Attila's reputation was extraordinary. Roman writers would later call him the Scourge of God, a man whose name alone inspired fear across the empire. Under his leadership, the Huns had built a powerful realm, stretching across the Danube and deep into the European heartland. Roman emperors themselves were forced to pay tribute simply to keep him from invading. But tribute was never enough for long. When Attila turned his attention toward Italy, the consequences were catastrophic for the cities of the north. As the Hun armies descended into the region, panic spread rapidly. Roman defenses were already weakened, and many cities were unprepared for the speed and ferocity of the invasion. Some attempted to resist, hoping their walls would hold long enough for relief to arrive. Others surrendered in the hope of mercy. Neither strategy proved reliable. One of the most famous casualties of Attila's campaign was the great Roman city of Aquileia. Once among the largest and most important cities in the empire, Aquileia guarded a key gateway into northern Italy. After a prolonged siege, Attila's forces finally broke through its defenses. Ancient accounts describe the destruction as so complete that later generations struggled to identify where the city had once stood. As city after city fell, thousands of civilians faced a terrible choice. Staying meant risking massacre or enslavement. Fleeing meant abandoning homes, livelihoods, and everything familiar. Many chose to run. Their destination was not another city or fortress, but the strange and inhospitable wetlands along the Adriatic coast, known as the Venetian lagoon. At first glance, the lagoon hardly seemed like a refuge. It was a vast landscape of mudflats, marshes, and shallow waters, dotted with small islands. Farming was difficult, fresh water was limited, and the unstable ground made permanent construction nearly impossible. Yet it possessed one critical advantage: armies could not easily reach it. The Hun cavalry that had swept across the plains of Europe could not charge through marshes or navigate twisting channels of shallow water. For desperate refugees, the lagoon offered a natural barrier that even the most feared army in Europe would struggle to cross. Families began settling on the scattered islands, constructing simple wooden shelters raised above the damp ground. These were not intended to be permanent homes. Most refugees likely believed they would return to their cities once the danger had passed. But the world they had known was disappearing. Many of the cities they had fled were destroyed, abandoned, or left permanently weakened. In the decades that followed, new waves of invasions and political instability continued to sweep through Italy. Returning to the mainland no longer seemed safe. Gradually, what had begun as a temporary refuge started to evolve into something more permanent. Communities in the lagoon learned how to adapt to their unusual environment. Builders developed techniques for driving long wooden piles deep into the mud to create stable foundations for houses. Fishermen and merchants began navigating the channels by boat, turning the waterways into natural roads that connected the scattered islands. Trade slowly returned, and the lagoon's isolation began to transform from a weakness into a powerful defensive advantage. Invading armies found the region difficult to penetrate, while the inhabitants grew increasingly skilled at navigating the sea. Over generations, small settlements such as Torcello, Burano, and Rialto expanded and connected with one another. What had once been a loose collection of refugee communities gradually developed into a unified urban center. This emerging city would eventually become Venice. The irony is remarkable. Attila the Hun had marched into Italy seeking conquest and destruction. His campaigns devastated some of the most prosperous Roman cities in the region and sent thousands of terrified civilians fleeing for their lives. Yet those refugees, forced into the safety of the lagoon, laid the foundations of a city that would later dominate Mediterranean commerce for centuries. Venice would grow into a naval superpower, a center of banking and trade, and a republic that endured for more than 1,000 years. Its fleets would sail across the Mediterranean, its merchants would connect Europe with the markets of the East, and its wealth would produce some of the most magnificent architecture and art in the world. All of it began with people who were simply trying to escape an invading army. History often unfolds in unexpected ways. A campaign intended to destroy Roman power helped create one of the most unique cities ever built. And in one of the great ironies of history, the terror unleashed by Attila the Hun indirectly gave rise to the floating city of Venice.